Hey everyone, this is Gary Kay, and welcome to a Launch and Learn. I'm very excited to be here today, and I'm going to introduce our guests in just a moment. But there is not a topic more near and dear to me than AV over IP. I've been talking about the AV industry going over IP for, I don't know, 20 years now. I was on the first committee that Avixa started to talk about this technology, and I remember um, it's interesting because I remember some of the leading signal routing distribution companies coming up to me, including Crestron, who is a major part of today's session, and challenging me on how fast the industry would go over IP. And I think it happened slower than some thought and faster than many of us thought. And I'm really excited that it has moved along. And that's what our session is all about today. So you're here to learn about AV over IP. Obviously, Crestron's has been, if you look at volume, and we're going to talk about what that volume is, Crestron's been the leader as far as number of units, and their ecosystem is definitely installed more than anyone else's. So we're definitely going to focus on what they're doing, and but we're giving you an opportunity to chime in with questions, challenges to what we're talking about. If you want to, maybe you're working on a system right now and you don't know what to do, and maybe you have considered AV over IP and you're worried about the bandwidth issues, or maybe you're in the AV department and you're not sure how the IT department's gonna respond to this. Well, we got a perfect session for you because our guests today are experts at this. But I want to welcome you to the Launch platform. Thank you for joining us. This is our hybrid events platform, but obviously today's event is a live online event. We are live. We're not pre-recording this. As such, I might cough every once in a while because I've got a little bit of a cold, and I apologize. But and I'm going to try not to sneeze. You know, when you get that feeling like you're about to sneeze and you're trying to fight it off, that's just what I got. So we are live. That's what happens when you're live. But so over to the right of me here, what you're going to see is a little Q&A box. That's your opportunity to ask questions. That's the easiest, quickest way to ask questions. Obviously, those questions are moderated. We want to make sure everyone keeps it respectful on here, so we moderate the questions that come in. Those questions will come directly to me, and I can ask the guests those questions as they come in, and depending on the topic, I might ask them at any given moment. So even if you're not sure if you want to ask a question, or you're not sure if we're going to address it, go ahead and ask the question. Go ahead and take the chance to ask question. And for now, just pop in and say hello and tell us where you're from. We want to see where's the farthest person away. Where's the farthest person away? I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. One of our guests is in New Orleans, the place that has probably the best food in the United States. And the other, I'm not sure where Joel is. We'll have to ask him in just a second. Below this video window here is polling. We're going to ask you a few polling questions. The polls will change, maybe 3 or 4 times. That's it. We're not going to ask you a bunch of questions. We're going to keep them, simple. And this is just for us to get an idea, sort of what your thoughts are on AV over IP and kind of where you're at in AV over IP. And then of course, below that is networking, and this is where you can talk amongst yourselves. You can also you could ask a question inside networking. We're probably going to see it. My producer Emily's good at looking at that kind of stuff, and she'll send me a message. I don't always get a chance to look at the networking sessions; they're a little harder for me, but she'll aggregate questions from both sections for me and send them so I can ask those questions. I want to welcome you all to this session, and it's time for me to stop talking for a minute and give our guests a chance to talk. I first want to welcome Tom, is it Finnicle?
Finnicle, yeah.
Finnicle, okay,
Yep.
Finnicle. Tom Finnicle with LSU Health. I'm honored to have you here. You come highly recommended. You and I both know Laney Materis. He's a good friend of mine, and also Catherine. She used to go by Alvarez, and I forget her actual last name now, who's also at Crestron now. So we go back a while because I've done some projects there. But why don't you introduce yourself and kind of not just say who you are, but kind of tell what your kind of daily role is at LSU Health.
Sure. I'm Tom Finnicle. I'm from LSU Health in New Orleans, to be distinguished from the other LSU Health campuses. Basically, our daily duties here range from as much as hand-holding of faculty during classroom setups to troubleshooting any actual issues they have, answering help calls, which are for those exact things. Also, we do some design of systems. We work with hand in hand with the networking group and facilities here to ensure that our classroom projects and upgrades actually go the way we want them to, and we don't have too many surprises along the way.
That's going to be one of the issues we talk about, because when we first got into AV over IP, the resistance came from IT. I'd say half the resistance came from IT, because the idea of putting video on the network. The other half of the resistance came from the AV channel, concerned about making a big change like that. So we're going to address both of those. Joel Mulpeter, sorry. Joel, I was referring to Catherine Bell. I know her as Alvarez because she and I worked together for many years before she had the last name Bell. But Joel is a product marketing at Crestron, and Joel, introduce yourself. Obviously, you and I know each other, but introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Joel Morpeter. Yeah, I look after product marketing here at Crestron for our commercial side of the business. So yeah, our day-to-day is working closely hand in hand with our product managers and engineers, helping bring all these products to life as we launch them and bring them to the market. And then, yeah, we get very heavily involved in things like trade shows. We're very deep in ISE right now, and not too long after that, we're deep in Infocom and all the other shows. But yeah, making sure that everything we project out into the world about the way the products should be talking about them and looking at them, all that comes to life.
Well, I want to challenge you on the first question, because one of the things that y'all made an announcement about having 1.5 million NVX devices deployed. And I kind of want to, I guess in a way it's a challenge, but I kind of want you to explain to me, how and what have you learned from that, or what can we learn from that even, that maybe a spec sheet can't tell us?
Yeah, we're very proud as a company to have shipped the amount of endpoints we have that enable AV over IP. At the same time, those endpoints go into amazing projects and amazing jobs that our industry creates. Right, that's not the product that does that. That's the industry that pulls those together, and that comes from the consultants, integrators, and then obviously ultimately end users that have these dreams and these visions for these spaces as well that we bring to life. So we're super proud. At the same time, we're as equally proud seeing all the projects that they end up in and they enable.
Yeah, and ultimately, there's less resistance to AV over IP now. It's been out a while. I think if you look at Jeffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, and you start with innovators. I mean, that I'd say 10 years ago, the innovators were adopting AV over IP. The numbers were really small. Early adopters, I think we've crossed the chasm from early adopters to early majority when you look at a number like 1.5 million. I think what you have promoted, sort of have embraced, I guess is probably the best way to say it, is the ecosystem approach to AV over IP. Talk about what is different about what that means. Like, what is that exactly? I mean, I know ecosystem from being a big Apple, fan. Like, I have everything Apple, and it's nice because it all just works together. So I kind of know what that means, but how do you look at that?
Yeah, ecosystem for us really comes from, everything Crestron makes was engineered to work together, right? So from AV over IP endpoints through to what we do in collaboration with conferencing tools and, bringing Teams and Zoom into those spaces, intelligent video, intelligent audio, right through to obviously, control systems and user interfaces and the cloud management side that comes into that as well. So that's the first part of the ecosystem. That's the Crestron, product line. But when it comes to the products that have that moniker of NVX with them or AV over IP, for us, that's really enabling video, audio, and USB over the network. So we see those as the three mediums you need to pass. Obviously, controls inherent in those, right? That you need some sort of control happening at the same time, but enabling that video, audio, and USB to go anywhere you need it to go. And there's certain endpoints that support, maybe only supports video and audio, doesn't support USB. That's the choice you make as you're designing systems. But at the top layer, we want to enable those signals to go anywhere across that infrastructure that has now become the network.
So wireless, it's been around for a long time, even before AV over IP. Would you consider that AV over IP? I noticed that you integrated your Air Media into some of the into some of the NVX products. Basically, is that would you consider that part of the ecosystem of AV over IP? Because you mentioned, HDMI, you mentioned video and audio, and you mentioned USB. Is wireless part of that, or am I kind of missing the point there?
No, they're converging relatively quickly, I guess is probably the way to put it. We do our media both wireless and wired today. So, our media technology is getting content or information from my personal device onto the screen. So that's from, my device into a transmitter, ultimately into a receiver, out onto the screen. We have historically done that wirelessly. When we do that compared to NBX AV over IP, we're talking a very different level of bandwidth. And there's certain latency that you have to give up to get there. But these days we also do that over wired, right? Enabling endpoints to sit on the network that are actually transmitting, air media technology, I guess, but it's AV over IP, right? We are taking that signal in a slightly different codec or a slightly different way. We're pushing it over the network. When we do wireless air media, we're just generating the wireless access point, or we're joining an existing wireless network that's in the facility.
And Tom, let me ask you this, because this is, of all the people watching this, they're going to be at different states of adoption, and some of them will not have adopted AV over IP at all. Where did the challenges come? And I don't necessarily mean technological challenges. I mean, we're going to get into that, but where did the resistance come from internally, or was there no resistance at all?
Well, part of my advantage is that I am part of the IT department. Now, mind you, I don't do IT. I would say I'm just the AV guy. But the fact is, the IT department that we have tends to get excited about doing different things. The network engineer who really worked on our first deployment was across the hall from me. And he would ask me questions and he would get involved. And I have to say that part of the help was taking the NVX classes that Crestron offered, because it allowed me to talk to him using some terminology that he understood. Now, of course, obviously he understood a whole lot more about networking than I do, but I was able to help him along and point him in the right direction. And honestly, around this place in our department, you never tell them that something can be centralized if you don't mean to do it. And that was one of the big advantages of NVX, is we had a way to do something off existing infrastructure that in many cases needed to be upgraded, but you had a way to do it to where they could be participants. And the network group is just, they're fantastic.
So were there any limitations? Did they say something like, hey, you can do this as long as it's below this bandwidth or anything? Or was there anything like that ever mentioned? Because I mean, obviously with AV over IP, you can go pretty high as far as bandwidth goes.
So we did frighten them initially with some of the things we talked about, especially in the very early stages of NVX when we were getting started. But as I said, they got excited about that instead of getting upset. So it's important to approach it, at least for us, it was important to approach it as not so much a challenge, but just a, hey, look what we can do, and can't you help us get this done?
Okay, so you're kind of lucky in that sense, because a lot of universities were early adopters, but also there was a lot of resistance in the IT department. Joel, what are the pain points now to integrating AVR? Are we past the bandwidth issue? Am I overemphasizing it? And Tom is saying we are. So I guess I should come up with a different question for you, Joel.
I think it's certainly less and less, as we go year on year here, right? It's definitely getting less of a concern. We've always been big on pushing the 1 gig infrastructure that we believe is truly scalable. Beyond that, there's special use cases for things like 10 gig and stuff, but and really high resolution, but certainly not something that we believe is really that scalable in today's networks. But yeah, we've been a big fan of that. We've certainly get still some customers that do want to limit bandwidth. The nice thing is you can do it. It's certainly, there's something you give up when you do it, right? And you have to be prepared to give that up. But when you do, it still works, and still we have those options. But these days, less and less. Certainly.
How about connecting, Joel, to the infrastructure that exists already? Like, I mean, are you getting questions about managed systems? Are you getting questions about making sure you can control it across, some IT platform that is being used to manage the printers and the projectors and everything else in the, like, where are we with regard to that? Is it still fragmented as far as that goes, or are you starting to see more of that being centralized?
There is still some fragmentation, but again, more than we were 5 years ago, let's say, as a point in time. Segregated networks were, more often deployed previously, and now it's more about how do I bring this into my corporate network or whatever the name they use for it. But it really is becoming more and more standard to be just how do I bring this into one network? I don't want to manage multiple networks. I don't want these points of potential security concerns with the network sitting separate to everything else and open switches and ports. So it is becoming more and more just how do we put it on the network?
And Tom, do you is all your AV over IP on the same network in the same set of buildings? Are you going between buildings? Are you having to use any fiber? Are you going to other campuses? I mean, how far are you going with this? And do you have any limitations as to how you send video or anything like that?
Currently, we really just rely on the building core. Whatever switch is attached to that building core is how we can pass through. We don't have the bandwidth between buildings. Currently, it's one of those things we're looking at, but it also, everything is segmented on a VLAN. So everything in what is known as the NVX VLAN is that VLAN can route everything within a building within that core. And it really, the biggest issue we have is, as a state institution, getting new network hardware is not something that we have a regular plan for. So it ends up coming up to, we're doing a project, we're using NVX, you're going to have to upgrade this switch stack. And I don't tell them. I tell networking what I need, and they say, oh, this is what we need.
Okay. And Joel, I have a question regarding analytics. Okay. And maybe you don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask this question in hopes that you do. And we haven't rehearsed this, so I don't know if he knows the answer to this or not. So you've got 1.5 million units. I'm going to be really bummed if you don't know any data about those 1.5 million units. I want to know stuff like reliability. What are the typical support questions? What are the resistances coming from IT? Life cycle, like how long are they lasting? Upgrade, scalability, all those kinds of things. Can you give me any data based on what you've shipped so far? Because I know that's one thing that, being the pioneer in that segment, you're going to be the only one that really kind of knows that. And I'm curious where you're at.
Yeah, we're we, in terms of reliability, we're very proud of the fact that we have a very, very low yield on units that first off come off the production line with an issue, right? Because that's our first point of checking those things. But also then out in the field, the return rate is super low as well. We are still running the original MBX boxes we shipped, right? The damn MBX 350 was the first unit, and there's plenty of customers out there. I'm not sure if Tom's in this case, but there's plenty of customers out there that have those running today, upwards of 7, 8 years, 10 years later, that are running reliably, right?
Right.
So we're very proud of that achievement, and we have continued that same pedigree through all the different versions of MBX. But MBX for us really is, the hardware changes, processing changes, the chips, the way we make them, the certain inputs we need on them, right? We added USB-C, we upgraded the internal on chip on them when we moved to the 360s, when we moved to the 3.8s. To bring more capabilities, but we have also continued to bring what updates we can to every device in the platform. So today, when you get DMMBX firmware, you're updating features in those 350s that were purchased in the original series that we released. So, and we'll continue to do that as much as that's technically possible. There's some technical limitations on that, of course. But yeah, we want to continue to do that, keep bringing those features. We've released easily over 100 features on the 350 platform since it launched.
Do you know the date? Do you have any data on what percentage of those units used the upgrade? Like, when Apple ships a new iPhone, they say, 70% of the people upgrade in the first month, 90% after 3 months. What is that percentage? Is it pretty high? The people that are actually taking the time to do that firmware update?
Yeah, for the units we have data on, typically they're our units sitting inside of XIO Cloud, right? The customers are consuming XIO Cloud. We have some anonymous data from that. If something's not in a cloud platform for us, we don't know how it's being used. We don't reach into that data for security reasons only. But of those units, we have major versions of firmware, and we know that at least 50% of those or more are sitting above, sitting on that major firmware version we have out in the field today.
And what about security? Like, are some of these firmware updates dealing with security? Because it seems like that's a moving target in anything computer related.
Yep, almost always. Every firmware update we have has some sort of security patch in it. Right? We're either solving for a CVE that is published and exists, and we there's a time clock on solving for those, or we're just addressing things in the background that we've found through our own testing as well. So always addressing bugs, always addressing security issues, always updating. There's underlying OSs and things in these devices that need patches and stuff applied to them. So doing that as well, all at the same time.
And Tom, have you found this to be scalable? Have you found AV over IP to be scalable? Is there a limitation to what you like? Are there facilities you're like, we can't do this yet in AV over IP?
As far as number of endpoints, our last project we deployed almost 1,000 endpoints. What makes it possible are the tools that Crestron provides between the NVX tool, which allows you to discover all the NVXs on a given network, as well as Toolbox and our director that we use. We are able to keep track of things in an unprecedented manner. With with the old systems, you could keep track of the processors. Now you can keep track of every endpoint. So it is really scalable, and deploying the firmware that you were talking about becomes a lot simpler too.
That's a good sign. I'm curious, are you able to use NVX in large lecture halls where you're doing image magnification or even LED kind of applications? You've not found any limitations as far as bandwidth or anything like that?
Haven't found anything. We've done some big spaces and lots of endpoints. And talking back to the 350s, Joel was referring to earlier, of the original ones we had in our 52 endpoint project. I think we've returned 6 for repair, and 2 of those were from water damage from contractors. So
I'm curious what kind of water damage a contractor would make. Don't tell me, actually.
It's a medical school. I'm not going to elaborate.
Okay. That's why I said don't tell me. All right. So there was a panel. There was a 2030 vision panel that Brad Hensey was on. Joel, have you heard of him?
Yeah, occasionally.
Okay. Yeah, actually, he runs marketing for Crestron, I think, globally. I'm actually gonna read the quote instead of trying to paraphrase a quote, if you don't mind. So if you'll indulge me on this, the standards conversation is one I love. We talk about it internally a lot. The best thing about standards, there's plenty to choose from. There are places for standards that add real value. There are also places where manufacturers can and should continue to innovate. I think the performance standards are great because they set the bar and a definition that give manufacturers the ability to demonstrate how we deliver and how do we deliver it, how we deliver it, and how we deliver it in a really great way. These standards that these are all standards that we should, there are standards that we all should all invest in, but we have to retain the ability to deliver a really great experience. Okay, that was in response to, there's been a movement to standardize AV over IP, primarily from the broadcast industry, not from the Pro AV industry, I should mention. And a lot of the manufacturers that have come over with these standards have come from the broadcast space. And, it's interesting because being an Apple fan, I totally hijacked this statement because I think what's made Apple different is the fact that they haven't gone the Microsoft Windows way, and they haven't gone the way of the other operating systems, and they've done their own thing. Now, I know that there are Android fans out there, and there are, Chrome fans. I mean, there's so many different OSs nowadays, but I get it when you're talking about ecosystem, because you have the ability to have a lot more control when you control every little piece of the pie. Now, the trade-off, of course, Joel, is, there's the belief by some that limits innovation, right? There's also the belief that you're potentially holding back other manufacturers from developing new products and things like that. But I know your opinion on this, but I want to ask it in a slightly different way. But ultimately, I know you're aware of the standards out there, right? But you have a lot of history, like 10 years of history now using your devices. I feel like almost like you can't go the way of the standards because you have this built-in infrastructure that already exists with these whatever number of installs that you have. That I feel like that if you shifted or did a U-turn or whatever, it would almost be like starting over.
Yeah, definitely. We you know, our view is standards aware, right? We have to be aware of what's happening out there. We have to be aware of the standards that are coming up and how to integrate with them when it makes sense. At the same time, you know, we have a platform that we believe achieves everything that our customers need and continue to evolve and innovate on that. So, you know, in terms of integrating into those standards, we quite often look at MVX sitting right aside those, right? When you have a need for pure broadcast use cases, we should be able to work MVX into that experience. If you need to send it further than where MVX can go because you have a bandwidth limitation, you need to bring that to a different protocol that's a lower bandwidth. We want to find ways to enable that, right? Today, we do that quite often hardwired, but we're definitely aware of ways and are starting to work on ways to do that more natively as well in the future.
So there have been some questions that have come in. I want to shout out to Marco Bittenhouse. He comes all the way from the Netherlands. I used to live in Utrecht, so I know the Netherlands really well, and I love your country. Actually, Tom, the Netherlands should feel quite familiar to you because like you, they're below sea level. A lot of the country is below sea level, and they deal with kind of very similar climates actually. Now, and I would argue Amsterdam and New Orleans are also both similarly fun places. And so I think there's you got a bond there with Marco. So welcome, Marco, to this Launch and Learn. Ronaldo Rodriguez asked a question, kind of going back to what I'd asked you, Joel. I'm going to go back and then we're going to go back forward because there's some other questions I want to get to. How much influence have BYOD products had in today's meeting rooms? Like, I guess another way to ask this is, of all of these systems that you're putting in, Joel, AV over IP, what percentage of them are BYOD? Like they're bringing that wireless connectivity to it, or you're adding these USB-C connectivity tools to it?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen a trend of the amount of endpoints that sit in meeting rooms. And when I say endpoints, I mean sources and displays adjust. You know, there is multi-display spaces, but the amount of sources is, you know, I would say arguably lower today than it was 10 years ago, right? The meeting rooms are quite comfortable with someone having a laptop and plugging that source in. So things like USB-C obviously enable that multi-discipline transport across that cable, right? Which we've now added in MVX. But you know, products like AirMedia allow us to get those same signals to the peripherals in the room as well. So BYOD is, you know, very prevalent in, you know, looking at the size of spaces and the type of spaces, right? The smaller spaces, things like AirMedia make a lot of sense. Plug it into a peripheral soundbar, get that BYOD experience. As you go up in the complexity in spaces and the size of them, there's going to be more sources, and that's typically where we see more AV over IP adoption happening these days as well. So, you know, it's a bit of a trade-off on the room size and the room use case. The workflow in the room, always super important, but smaller the space, simpler the technology, higher up the space, the more we expect to see control systems, AV over IP, all those things.
And the larger the space, you tend to see more different kind of installs where you have HD base T also in the room with AV over IP, and then maybe even H.264, 265 going out of the room to stream it onto YouTube or something like that. That's typically what I've seen as well. One comment came in from Patrick Barron, and by the way, Marco, I think we answered your question that you came in with. But if I didn't answer when I asked Joel the previous question about standards, let me know if I didn't totally answer your question there. But Patrick Barron just asked a question, or made a comment actually. This is kind of interesting, and I'd love your feedback on this, Tom. Patrick says, I know as a general rule, unless there is a specific failure or security fix implemented that is needed in a firmware update, I typically don't update firmware on a completed, signed off job because it's likely to introduce more problems than it would fix. Have you experienced that, Tom, or how do you address it? Do you just automatically do all the firmware updates, or do you evaluate them, one by one, or how do you do? And do you do them, campus wide?
So generally, we don't look to firmware until we've had an issue. If the systems are running well, my philosophy is leave it alone. But if we do have an issue, typically one of the first things we do is check firmware, and we'll do an update. And that update may fix it, it may not, but generally it doesn't hurt. And one of the reasons I think is that we do wait. We don't immediately apply a firmware update unless we know that update fixes something specifically that we're looking to do, or adds additional features.
Does your department look at this in reference to security the same way they look at everything else on a network? Do they look at the notes of the firmware update and then make a decision based on that? Or are they like, well, we haven't had this security problem yet? How are they taking it as seriously, because it is on the network, as they would the copier?
So our network that we use, the VLAN that we use for NVX, doesn't touch the outside. It is only an on-campus network. So now it is.
I'm sure there's a bridge to the network somewhere, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure someone with skills could get through it, but we have an information security team that will immediately let us know if there's any signs of anything. So we really have a tendency to worry less about security unless we know of something. And certainly if we see a firmware advertised that tells us that that it includes a major security update, we will make sure to do that. And if we're concerned, we'll consult with our network group and security group and find out how vulnerable they feel this might make us.
It brings up a really good point that no one has brought up until you just said that, Tom. And that is, you can install an AV over IP system on the existing network, or you can set up a VLAN so that it's separate from the existing network. Why did you choose to do it a VLAN rather than on the existing network? Was that a IT decision and something you weren't involved with?
It was mainly the network group's decision, but it's because it's multicast. Okay. We tend not to allow multicast across a lot of the network just because of bandwidth issues it could cause if it gets out of hand. And as long as it's on a particular VLAN, they can set all the controls that are necessary to make it do what it's supposed to without affecting anybody else. And we can reach those endpoints from other VLANs, but by unicast. So that allows that traffic to stay contained, but still allow us to communicate from outside.
So Joel, does Crestron offer like consulting services or anything like that to help them make that decision? Or do you rely on the IT department to make that decision? Because this is a decision you have to make really early on. It's not like you can switch halfway through.
Yeah, 100%. This is that initial deployment. Those decisions need to be made months before that, typically, and bring all the right stakeholders in. So we have a bunch of guides about deploying AV over IP on the network, what the pros and cons are of different approaches. And then through our training as well, we also offer a lot of that advice. We also have our sales support services that is more than happy to discuss the pros and cons there as well. They're our design team and supply those guides. But we want to make sure that we're giving as much information to make an informed decision and really help that transition that AV request into an IT request and be like, we want to do video and do all these high resolutions and stuff. IT doesn't care as much about that. They care about what does it do to my network, and understanding why multicast, why this much bandwidth, what the options are around that is really the important bit.
So we have two questions from Jeremy Schroth. And I don't know, I know the name Jeremy Schroth. I just don't know where he's from. Jeremy, follow up, because I know your name.
He's down the hall from me.
Oh, is he really?
Just to let you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. He had two interesting questions. And I don't know if you're going to be able to answer these, Joel, but I'm curious. Maybe the same question Tom has. Is there a plan to make the encoders, the NVX encoders and decoders, a little smaller to act as replacements for DM Lite? That's the first question. And then the second question was, will the ability to move NVX units around in director domains going to be coming out soon? So I guess, Tom, you probably have the same questions.
The second one we have been working on for a while, yes.
Okay. So Joel, what do you what about those two questions? I mean, this is probably the kind of question you probably get all the time, but
Yeah, footprint for us is always something we're looking to shrink, right? We know these devices go into all sorts of situations, right? In behind displays, in roof cavities, and all sorts of things, and size always matters to make that effective. So we did shrink our E30 and D30, right? Our dedicated encoders and decoders. The 3.8 series that we just released, they are the same size as the 3.6s, but they're packing a lot in there. There's a lot of heat reasons why we have to do
yeah, I was
that.
going to say, isn't heat
Reasons.
dissipation the main reason for size?
That's a bulk of it is heat. EMF plays a big part as well, right? Making sure that those boxes aren't projecting out anything they shouldn't be. But yeah, trying to cool them whilst we're running PoE, running relatively high amounts of processing through these when we know they're put in situations that aren't exactly the best for airflow. It becomes really important that we can move the air around in the boxes. And MBX for us also goes into a lot of spaces where noise is a problem as well, right? So we always have a residential arm to our business that does deploy AV over IP. And in your bedroom, for example, with your TV and an MBX box behind there, you don't want to hear a fan whirring all the time, right? In certain situations, in boardrooms and meeting rooms, same situation stands. So, cooling for us is really important to make sure we can do it as passively as possible, or only be doing it when the video is running, for example. We do things like that.
All right. So John Kessler, stand by. We're going to answer your question in just a minute. I want to go back to my questions. Let's talk about convergence. Let's talk about compression. Let's talk about sort of all the video thing. Like I feel like audio is easy to do over IP. You've got a bunch of things that have happened in the industry lately that have made that easier. Tom, you're kind of doing like this. Are you having problems with the audio across the network, or what tell me why you disagree with that?
I don't disagree with it as long as you have an integrator who is capable of handling that.
Yeah. Okay. I totally agree with that. Yeah, you definitely need to use someone who's qualified and knows what they're doing, and you don't necessarily want to be the beta test, right? But Joel, what about when you're bringing in 5K resolution now with Microsoft Teams Room Front Row and specialty cases? And what about when the athletic department now all of a sudden wants to put in an 8K resolution LED, which I'm quite sure LSU has quite a few of them around with the football team and the basketball program and stuff like that. What about that? What happens then when you're doing that compression, and how are you handling that? And because that same feed is also feeding the sky boxes at the stadium, but also feeding the classrooms so that students can watch stuff in their dorms in the room. Like, what about all that? How is that handled?
Yeah, we made a leap. We started MBX with 4K, right? That was the resolution at the time. Through things like Front Row, as you mentioned, 5K has become more prevalent, right? But 5K really handling the wider aspect ratios, right? 32:9 and 21:9 being the prevalent two there. So that stretches the pixels out. They're still not as high, but they're much wider, and pushes into that 5K realm of pixel space. So
Sure.
When we released the 3.8 series, or 3.8.4 and 3.8.5, we now support 5K on those, right? We managed to do that still at a 1 gig transport. As we shift up to 8K, that may not be as possible, right? When we move to 8K, we are talking 4 times the amount of video space. So, the options you end up with is applying heavier compression. The heavier compression you apply, the more latency you increase your latency first, right? Because there's processing time to crunch all those bits and then spit them back.
Which wouldn't matter in the case of like a big LED that's on the front of a building or in a stadium, right? Would latency really matter in that case?
If you're watching it live and you're seeing the video stream at the same time, it matters a lot. If you are watching it independent of seeing it live, then less of a concern. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But
it's still an issue that you're looking at, and obviously, because I seem to recall an announcement about 8K from you, or y'all were doing a test thing or something. Haven't you already started addressing that a little bit?
Yeah, we have we have boxes that are running 8K. They're not for the public yet in any kind of way, but we have proven we can do that on the codec that we have today on our devices. It's just a matter of having the right hardware for it. So
yeah, and the only application for that now would be like large LED applications. Those are, but it's good, I guess, Tom, to know that they're thinking about this, because at some point in time, I mean, I teach here at the University of North Carolina. We don't have anybody that uses 4K from their laptop to project on projectors and panels that we have all over campus that are 4K. So most people are still doing HD, or maybe they're doing 1280 by, or they're doing 1920 by 1200 or something like that, or maybe a little higher than that. But we don't have a lot of 3840 by 2160 around here. Tom, am I wrong? I mean, are you guys doing a lot of 4K? I guess in the hospital space is a little different, right?
Well, the dentists, you'd be surprised.
Okay.
They're the ones who want that 4K detail on their images. And within some of the med school classes where, and even the nursing classes where they're looking at X-rays, and there are applications for it, but they really are rare, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we got a poll result in here. I think that's kind of interesting. What matters most for AV over IP? 40% said reliability and uptime. I think that's really interesting because it wasn't resolution and quality, right? That's very interesting to me, because there was always a big concern about this compressing from 12 to 18 gig down to 1 gig. Well, how big of an issue that'd be? And the truth of the matter is, Joel, if you don't have a reference, you don't really notice stuff like that. And as long as you're getting the signal, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but as long as you're getting the signal across, I might notice because it's my content, right? But when I'm showing it to an audience, I remember one time going to the World of Coca-Cola, doing this big rollout 20 years ago with Sony. And Sony had come out with these new projectors. And I remember that at the time, the president of Coke, it was kind of a thing that he was coming to see this. And we were sitting in this 4K theater at the World of Coca-Cola in Atlanta. And he walked in, they started up the video. 10 seconds into the video, he stood up and screamed, "That's not Coke Red." And it was very interesting to me. None of the people with Coke, the whole time the thing was being set up, the whole time it was being tested, noticed that, but he had that keen eye to say, look, and it was just simply an adjustment thing, but ultimately he noticed that. And so I guess there are people that are really gonna, the quality matters, but reliability and uptime is what saves your job, right, Tom? I mean, isn't that really what saves your job?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Professors can forgive just about anything except not being able to show their content.
Yeah, that's a good point. So 20% of people said vendor cycle and life cycle management. 26% said IT compatibility and security, and 13% said cost deployment and efficiency. That's interesting to me, because that means, Joel, you guys could raise your prices. Y'all should just raise your prices tomorrow. There's a price increase coming tomorrow. Well, it looks like only 13% care about that. Tom, was that okay?
So the price increase, really, to be honest, we've shifted from the very initial introduction of NVX to now. There isn't a whole lot of price difference now between AV over IP and any other traditional system. Where the price comes in is the back-end infrastructure. So now I always tease the network guys. We always see who can get the lower price, so that we can blame the other guy for raising the price of the project.
That's actually very, 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 very true. So when we look at the future a little bit, Joel, can you kind of give us how are you preparing? I mean, you're getting asked the same questions that I kind of brought up in some of the other stuff, the infrastructure. I mean, this is part of the infrastructure of a system, and you've got to be ready for every possible scenario. More wireless, right? More wireless options that are out there. It's not just connecting a laptop anymore. It's now connecting mobile devices, and they're not all iPhones, right? It's not just connecting mobile devices and laptops. It's now, what is AI going to come up with, right? I mean, you have these little different devices out there. And then you also have, cameras that no longer are just sending video, but they're sending AI-based location information. They're sending, and you have these devices like Logitech has a sensor that's sending, environmental. I mean, this is a lot of stuff for this network to. I mean, you're looking at all of this and keeping all of this in mind, because you're ultimately going to be the one that's become the central repository for this, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our main focus with AV over IP at the moment is we need to make sure we continue to support the standards we talked about when they make sense. We need to continue to support the resolutions for the right use cases and where they make sense. always balancing quality, latency, and bandwidth at the same time, right? That's a three-legged stool that we have to balance all the time with those deployments. And then the other thing we're really heavily focused on at the moment is the deployment and tools and making sure they do everything our customers need when they are deploying these systems on scale. No one typically buys one MVX box. They're buying a decent number of them to do a decent amount of spaces, especially our education partners have a lot of spaces that warrant that. And then we really wanted that MVX technology, right? That technology of encoding and decoding video. It is that infrastructure piece. It can live in lots of other Crestron products. So that's another big focus of ours as well, as we bring the efficiency down on that and the processing chips get more and more powerful. Where can we put that technology in more products that makes them more tightly integrated into that ecosystem?
I'm curious that, like, I would love to be in that development room knowing what you guys are talking about, because I have a lot of ideas myself. John Kessler's question was, I think it's aimed at you, Tom. When doing firmware updates, do you use a DM NVX director?
Generally, we use the NVX tool for that, but we can use the director for that as well.
Aaron,
but we
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying we tend to use the tool only because it's a little more straightforward. We like the interface better, and it gives you a little more feedback. But honestly, either way.
Okay, so Jeff Heron, I think this is a comment more than a question. We're using Air Media as a BYOD bridge. That's kind of interesting for traditional multi-source room systems. Primary presenter cam is AI tracking behind one button. Ceiling array mics trigger participants. Cam presents the camera and cam switching, and then the entire room system hits the USB bridge into an AM3200WF to feed BYOD as if it were just a video bar. That's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't think that's actually. I'm not sure that's probably fairly common now when you're mixing sort of traditional AV over IP with UC. You're going to see more of this.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a general trend that, BYOD, you could say historically has been focused from huddle rooms, right? The spaces that didn't warrant a full-blown codec.
Yeah.
But we are seeing a lot of BYOD-like platforms like Air Media get deployed in large spaces, right? Where people are happy to bring in their laptop and connect a USB-C dongle or even a cable from the table, but AV over IP. And media in this case is the backbone for it. Like the space is not really what determines the technology anymore. It's what are you trying to do in the space? And if people just want to go in and meet on their laptop.
Well, that's actually, you bring up a really good point, because John Ballar, who I've known for, 30 years, he would agree with what you just said, because I think the difference between a good integrator and maybe an integrator that's maybe not as good is one that is looking at what the application is and what you really need to do, not trying to sell the new technology. His comment was, experience shows that the biggest integrators may not necessarily be the most capable or most interested in expertly configuring these systems. I mean, it is very IT centric, does take a lot more time, there's a larger learning curve. You have levels of certification. I mean, you even have a master's program of certification and stuff. This is not the average person that can just walk right in and put in NVX, because you want it, obviously, I think, Crestron, you want it done right, so you're not having to go back and go behind someone. But I imagine that ultimately the whole industry is going to go AV over IP in the not too distant future. Joel, I'm sure you got to agree with that, even if they won't all go with Crestron.
Yeah, it's taking a larger percentage day by day, but our product portfolio today is made up of Air Media into HD-based for point-to-point, where that makes sense, and then into AV over IP. We still believe that point-to-point has, it's definitely a use case in a small meeting room. I just need to get content from the table to the display. It's over the length of especially USB-C, right? But it's over the length of HDMI. How do I transport that? It's the right technology to do that as well. But you could put AV over IP in that place if that was your standard, if you wanted to have just AV over IP boxes. And we have some universities that do that, literally transmitter, receiver, or encoder and decoder in a small meeting space, because standardizing and monitoring and maintaining those spaces is a higher weight to them than maybe that slight increased cost, especially the network overheads as well that come with that. They would rather know about them all, see them all, and be able to monitor every device in the same way. So it all just depends on how you view your environment. Is cost more important, or is the monitoring and management more important?
I think the latter, based on what we just learned from that poll, right? I mean, but ultimately, we only have a few more minutes, Tom. But I want to ask you kind of a parting question. What advice would you give other organizations evaluating AV over IP today? If you could like talk to yourself back before you got all this started, what 2 or 3 pieces of information do you think are critical for you to keep in mind as you're evaluating AV over IP, especially for those people that are still doing HDMI or maybe even have legacy VGA stuff or barcode click shares or whatever might be in their room?
So honestly, the first point I would make sure that everyone knows is collaboration. You're not going to do it on your own. The AV group simply is not, at least ours, simply is not equipped to do that. You have to make the network folks your friends, even if it means baking them brownies. I haven't been above that. That and also working with the manufacturer of whatever you're using, because so many people, including integrators, don't take advantage of what a manufacturer has to offer and support. They seem to think that the manufacturer doesn't care if the system works right. But as I've always said, when somebody sees a manufacturer's name on a device, they don't say, hey, the AV guy screwed this up. They say that equipment is no good. So it's in everybody's best interest to make it work right. And then you have to make sure the leadership of your organization understands that, yes, this is going to be an initial outlay that's probably more than you were expecting, but we're going to get more out of it and we are going to be able to use it longer.
That's great advice. I appreciate that. And Joel, I mean, from your standpoint, within Crestron at least, AV over IP is already a standard. I mean, you're already doing more AV over IP than anything else. So, kind of, can you give us a glimpse of where we are now and where we might be 2 or 3 years from now?
Yeah, I think AV over IP is going to continue to grow and take market share, right? We have recently announced and finishing at the end of this year the discontinuation of our DM frames, right? That were the pedigree before AV over
I did
IP.
not know that.
Yeah, we announced that earlier in the year, and that'll be done by the end of the year. So there's a clear direction from us that AV over IP solves for those 32 by 32s and larger frames, and even up to 8 by 8s and 16 by 16s, in a more scalable way, leveraging the network, right? So, we want to continue to support the industry in doing that as well through training and other things like Tom mentioned, and the support we give directly to the customers. And we want to continue to innovate, right? We want to keep bringing new endpoints, new capabilities. Everywhere we can, those will be software enabled. When they can't be software enabled, will be new hardware, and bring that MVX technology stack into more products as well as we move forward.
We also have we have a link down below where you can get all the information you ever want on what we've been talking about today. Just scroll down the page. You'll see a link there. It'll take you directly to the MVX page. We're going to keep this page open for a little while longer so you guys, so those of you who are communicating with each other, can continue to message each other privately through networking. And I'm hopefully not sneeze before I close this. But ultimately, Tom, I really appreciate you. I mean, this was something that you did out of the goodness of your heart. We appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I'm just curious, whose rack is that behind you? Because not many people have a rack in their office.
That came from it actually came from the Chancellor's conference room when we redid it. And I will tell you just one final comment. It doesn't necessarily matter the amount of equipment and the complexity of the equipment doesn't necessarily matter about the size of the space, but if it's the Chancellor's conference room, he's getting the best.
That is very, very true. In fact, it's funny because where you do AV over IP, you end up using a lot less rack space, so you have plenty of space left over, and you can also now centralize everything and manage it from a centralized location. You don't have to have as much decentralized gear. Joel, I would sort of challenge you to kind of solve some of the in-room audio issues, because that even when you're going AV over IP, there's still a lot of in-room audio requirements that are there that could be looked at, and those are those are industry issues, certainly not Crestron issues. But Tom, thank you. Joel, any last words? Anything you want to say or any questions that I didn't ask you?
No, I think you got them all. We had a wide range of topics, all obviously based around AV over IP, but yeah, covered a lot. If there are any questions, reach out to anyone you know at Crestron. Obviously, always happy to answer, or myself directly.
Yeah, and don't forget you can click on their names and go to their LinkedIn profiles or just search them on LinkedIn. Guys, I really appreciate it. Tom, good luck with the game this weekend. You got a big one coming up. It seems like LSU always has a big game coming up during college football season.
So my son tells me.
Yeah, that's right. Your son is there, so he's in.
I got two of them there right now. So
okay. Well, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in college, my fraternity, we drove down to LSU to see North Carolina LSU play football. The game was over halfway through the first quarter when LSU scored 3 or 4 straight touchdowns on us, which is not different than what we are used to experiencing. But we had a ton of fun at the bars in and around that stadium. So it was a lot of fun. It's a unique experience. So enjoy it while your kids are there. Joel, where are you, by the way, Joel? I never did get around to asking where you're at.
I am based out of Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh yeah, okay. We talked about that before. Yeah, you're in Salt Lake City, and well, you got a couple of good football programs there this year as well. Congratulations! Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate both of you and all of you who joined us on the launch platform. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we really appreciate the time. I know that it's always tough taking time away from the day to learn something new like this, but hopefully this has been well worth your time. We always welcome the feedback. You can email me directly, Gary@therAVeagency.com. I look at all my email. Nobody reads my email for me. I do it myself. So feel free to reach out. And of course, you can always reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. Guys, have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.